For the last 15 years, there's been a narrative that has dominated the conversation around retail real estate. You've heard it everywhere. Malls are dead. Dead malls are featured in documentaries. They're explored on YouTube channels. Urban explorers film abandoned corridors and empty food courts. And if you only look at those images, it's easy to believe the conclusion. The American shopping mall is dying. But that narrative, while compelling, is incomplete because if malls were truly dead, then explain this. In 2025, Simon Property Group, the largest mall owner in the United States, reported 96% occupancy across its U.S. malls and outlets, along with about $800 in retail sales per square foot, up more than 8% year over year. There's not the numbers of a dying asset class, they're the numbers of a thriving one. So what's actually going on? Why are some malls abandoned while others are packed? Why do some communities lose malls while others still treat them like the center of social life? And why do investors still buy certain enclosed malls while others sell for pennies on the dollar? The truth about dead malls is not that malls stopped working. The truth is that the United States built too many of them. And over the last 15 years, the market has been quietly correcting that mistake. To understand dead malls, you have to start with a simple fact. For decades, the United States had more retail space per person than any country in the world. In the mid-2000s, the United States had roughly 24 square feet of retail per capita. By comparison, the UK has around 4 or 5 square feet, Japan about 4 square feet, Germany around 2 square feet. In other words, the United States had several times more retail space per person than most developed countries. And much of that space came in the form of enclosed shopping malls. The first truly enclosed mall in the United States, Southdale Center in Minnesota, opened in 1956, designed by architect Victor Gruen. The concept was revolutionary, a climate-controlled shopping environment combining department stores and smaller specialty stores under one roof. After that success, the format spread rapidly. Between 1970 and the early 2000s, mall development exploded. Once developers realized how profitable malls could be, the construction boom accelerated dramatically. The total number of U.S. shopping centers grew from about 11,000 in 1970 to more than 35,000 by 1990. As the department stores expanded around the country and developers built malls with department stores as anchors on the periphery, and these anchors drove traffic for the specialty tenants that they filled up on the interior. And basically the economics were loss leader, subsidize the department stores on the periphery, and then the traffic generated, the specialty tenants on the interior would pay a much higher rent and provide the return to the developers. At the time, this didn't seem like a problem as demand appeared limitless. In the 80s and 90s, a new phenomenon appeared. Developers were no longer building malls just to serve new suburbs. They were building malls to compete with existing malls. In many cities, developers opened newer, larger, and more upscale malls just a few miles away from older ones. Many metros ended up with multiple malls competing for the same customer base, sometimes located within 10 miles of each other. And for a while, the strategy worked. Retail spending was growing. Department stores were powerful anchors. Suburban populations were expanding, but eventually, the system reached saturation. According to research from CBRE, U.S. retail space per capita peaked around the time of the global financial crisis in 2008. After that point, something interesting began to happen. Retail space per capita began to slowly decline. From 2011 to 2019, the amount of retail space per person fell about 0.3% annually, while sales per square foot actually increased. That's an important point. Retail was not collapsing. Retail was right-sizing. The market was correcting decades of oversupply, and when a market corrects oversupply, weaker assets get exposed. That's where dead malls come from. At the time, it seemed logical. Retail demand was growing, population was expanding, and department stores wanted their own malls. Now, in terms of the mall space, I would divide the mall space into two sectors. The A malls or the A plus or the A minus malls, those A malls are more of the trophy properties, most often in the major metros, uh, owned by companies like Simon or Macerich or Brookfield. And these properties were able to expand traffic. They had the strongest anchors, and they were able to create activities and entertainment and food combined with existing retail to basically drive traffic and push rents higher. Now, what happened is that in the metros, there was a creation of suburban malls and too many malls in a metro. And so you'd have an A mall in a metro or maybe two A malls, and then you'd have a series of periphery malls that could not compete with the A malls or were simply too close, too attractive to the clients, to the clientele. So you had a bifurcation within a metro, the A malls and then the weaker malls. Then you have a situation where you have secondary and tertiary markets, often just dominated by one mall. And in this situation, you had some malls that were able to stabilize and thrive, and some that did not have the dynamics, whether it was ownership or leadership, to basically take anchor boxes that had closed and find an alternative use for them, either a retail use or some other type of use. The strongest malls, the ones with the best locations, best demographics, best ownership, best tenant mix, they absorb the demand. The weaker malls lose traffic, then tenant, then anchors, then eventually viability. This phenomenon is often described in retail research as the bifurcation of the American mall. Instead of the entire sector rising or falling together, malls split into two groups. Strong malls get stronger, weak malls decline. Real estate firms and retail researchers have documented this divide very clearly. Newmark, a major commercial real estate brokerage, notes that Class A malls, those in strong markets with high sales productivity, are not just surviving, they're thriving. These properties often have high occupancy, rising rents, strong foot traffic, continued tenant demand, and importantly, they're often irreplaceable assets. Very few enclosed malls have been built in the United States in the last 2 decades. Construction costs are too high, zoning too restrictive, capital markets cautious. This means that the best malls today face almost no new competition. Meanwhile, weaker malls are dealing with the opposite situation. They suffer from declining trade areas, aging physical infrastructure, anchor store closures, lack of reinvestment, and competition from stronger centers nearby. When these problems pile up, a mall can enter a downward spiral. First, the anchor closes. Then, co-tenancy clauses allow other tenants to reduce rent or terminate leases. Foot traffic drops, maintenance gets deferred, and eventually the property becomes what people call a dead mall. But the key point is this: dead malls did not all die at the same time. They did not die for the same reason. Most died because they were the weakest asset in an oversupplied market. Now here's where the story gets more interesting. Because in secondary and tertiary markets, the dynamics can be very different. In smaller cities and regional towns, there aren't 5 competing malls. There might only be 1. In addition, the barriers to building a new mall are extremely high. Construction costs for large enclosed malls are enormous, and the developers rarely pursue such projects today. This means that the existing mall often faces very little direct replacement risk. In major metros, new retail developments frequently compete with older ones. If the mall is a smaller town is maintained, it can remain the dominant retail property in the region for decades. In these markets, the enclosed mall can function as the primary retail hub for an entire region. Research from CBRE highlights several characteristics of these markets. Consumers in smaller markets often travel 20 minutes or more to reach major retail destinations. That means a single mall can draw from a much larger trade area. Secondary markets also tend to have less retail cannibalization, simply because there are fewer competing centers. And interestingly, consumers in smaller markets actually have more disposable income on average relative to housing costs because living expenses are lower. All of this can create a situation where a single enclosed mall becomes the main shopping destination, the main entertainment venue, the main gathering place for the community. In these markets, the mall is not just a retail asset, it's a regional hub. So if oversupply explains many dead malls, what actually pushes a mall over the edge? Usually, it's a combination of factors. The first is anchor loss. Department stores historically drove a significant share of mall traffic. And when major chains like Sears and Bon-Ton and others closed locations across the country, many malls lost their primary traffic generator. The second factor is deferred reinvestment. Retail properties require constant capital, lighting, flooring, common areas, food courts, entrances. If ownership stops investing in the property, customers notice. The third factor is design limitations. Urban Land Institute research has pointed out that many older malls suffer from poor circulation and visibility. Long corridors with few visual anchors, disconnected wings, dead ends, layouts that make navigation confusing. These design issues can quietly reduce foot traffic and tenant performance. And finally, there's market positioning. A mall that does not evolve with the needs of its community eventually loses relevance. But when ownership actively reinvests, and maintains the property, the outcome can be very different. There are many examples of mall reinventing themselves. One example is Plaza Americas here in Houston. Once a struggling mall, it was purchased by Baker Katz and repositioned to better serve the surrounding Hispanic community. The strategy focused on local businesses and community events and services and culturally relevant retail. Today, the mall operates with very high occupancy and functions as a community hub. Of the mall's 240 businesses, only 10 are national names. The owner explicitly aimed to make it a community center serving consumer, recreational, and social service needs. That highlights an important point. Thriving malls don't always look the same. What matters is whether the property fits the market. For investors, the enclosed mall is one of the most misunderstood assets in commercial real estate. Because the narrative around malls is so negative, many people assume the entire asset class is broken. But the reality is more nuanced. A mall can still be a strong investment if several conditions are met. The trade area has to have sufficient population and income. Competition from other malls needs to be limited. The property well-maintained. Anchors or traffic drivers are stable. And ownership is willing to reinvest when necessary. In other words, the enclosed mall is not automatically a bad investment. It's simply an asset class that punishes bad underwriting. So what's the truth about dead malls? The truth is that the American mall didn't suddenly stop working. The United States simply built too many of them. And when the market corrected, the weakest assets were exposed. Some malls were poorly located. Some had too much nearby competition. Some lost anchors and never replaced them. And some were simply neglected. The ones in the right markets, with the right ownership, the right anchors, and the right investment, they continue to thrive. They remain centers of shopping, entertainment, dining, and community life. Dead malls are not proof that the enclosed mall failed. They're proof that retail real estate, like every other form of real estate, ultimately rewards location, management, and discipline, and punishes everything else.